Welcome to this week's Cattle Call. I'm Susan Littlefield on the Rural Radio Network. Well, it's been kind of a tough roller coaster type of trade, but we had three nice updates taking place on the market. Unfortunately, on Wednesday when we're recording this, it did finish with some red on the screen after a nice day the day before. But really, we've done some giving back. We've also got some cash that's picked up. And then add to the fact that weather has not been your typical winter weather. That's weighing in on it, and a whole lot of other factors, which we're going to dive in today with Brad Kooima. Of course, he joins us with Kooima Kooima Varilek out of Sioux Center, Iowa. So let's kind of start out with this cattle market. I mean, we had a positive Tuesday, had a positive Monday, and after the manure spreader week of last week, it was kind of nice to have a couple up days.
Yeah, you made this too easy. You've set this up right by the net. Friday up $3, Monday up $2, yesterday up $1. Yeah, I'm starting to think you're bad luck. Maybe we got to be changing the day we do this.
Maybe.
Well, when things go south, have an up day, we don't change our socks, right? It's
right.
After nearly an all-time precedented sell-off, 15%, 15.5% in price, $33, $4, $5 on live cattle futures, 58 or something like that on feeder cattle futures. At some point you first stop going down and then you start to evaluate the correction. So I thought yesterday, February cattle where the open interest is, we managed to actually close above 50% retracement of the last leg down. That's the first definition. You managed to have 3 days against the trend, another, kind of something that as a technician, you go like, well, maybe we aren't in a downtrend anymore if we move 3 days in a row against that. Then we also closed above that downtrend channel, which I thought was also encouraging. So it's a little disappointing to give it back today, but realistically, we rallied $6 in 3 days and we're down $1.30 today. I'd like to try to be a glass half full guy here. I'm not going to lie, Susan, I'm struggling a little bit with what exactly my perspective ought to be. When you break 30 some dollars and it's the second week of December, it's hard for me to perceive that it would pay to be bearish after that kind of move, particularly this time of year. This is when typically you see seasonal lows come into place.
Right.
This is typically also the time of year when you see your weights peak, which is probably something we ought to talk about because weight has been an issue here for sure, Susan.
So when you look at the big picture, what's wrong with this market at this point?
The lack of leverage on the part of the producer is where it starts.
Okay.
And it's difficult. It's a very fine line. I said this more often. There's a very fine line between too many and not enough. I'm an old cash negotiator guy, right? And I believe strongly that it impacts price. So there was some attempt legislatively for 2 or 3 years that I was part of to do something. If we could have only gotten the 14-day delivery thing, we let the packer slow this kill. Well, what control do we have? The packer slowed the kill down, right? And backed a few cattle, slowed the turnover rate. That's their fancy way of explaining that. And then got way long bought. I mean, 2, 3, 4 weeks. One case, I know a guy that sat with cattle for almost 6 weeks before they got picked up. It's no wonder they weigh a ton,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and the weather's been perfect, of course. So we lost our leverage and I don't know. I think it snuck up on us. I don't really know of anybody. This doesn't feel like 2015 and 16. And trust me, I can show you my scar of what that was like, where we backed cattle up for a year and fought it. It felt to me like had a horrible winter, had an extremely hot summer, had record profits, making money like crazy. Who was going to fight a market like that? I really think up until 4, 5, 6 weeks ago, I think we were, as soon as we could get a bid, we were selling cattle. So I would also think then that we're not in as much trouble. If the weather would flip, slow down these record gains, work through a bit of the supply, maybe with some increased kill, work through some of the supply, because the Packers got big margins. Hopefully but it's not tomorrow. It's going to take us a little bit here to, I got 2 short kill weeks and we're going to come into. So I'm hoping like 3 or 4 weeks from now, we can talk about it and say, yeah, that we did finally get, we were in the process of that, putting in that bottom. Futures, certainly, futures, Fed cattle trading at or a discount to the last cash, very unusual. Typically we're carrying a weather premium into that winter time frame, but of course this time we have hardly had any winter.
And let's talk a little bit about that, because I know last week when we were at Nebraska Cattlemen, there was a lot of chatter about trying to keep these weights in check, because it really has been almost ideal winter growing conditions for these cattle.
And I'll take my turn on the soapbox and try to admonish all of us to stay current, get that way. Easier said than done. Last week I had 3 pens on the show list. They'd only buy one because the other 2 weren't fat enough, supposedly. And then you wait 2 or 3 weeks for them to get a debt. But I still got to say it. Let's try to stay current. And I get it. It's frustrating. And not everybody is made up this way. Obviously, I'm an old trader, so I look at a futures market where I can buy Feb cattle cheaper than, let's say I did get bid 168. Okay. So if I can buy Feb cap today, so I couldn't get that Friday, by the way. So if I would decide to take 168 and buy Feb futures at 167, I'm pretty comfortable with that. That's not for everybody. I get it. I do think you would maybe hasten the turnover a little bit this is going to make some people mad, but feeder cattle have not broke correspondingly like the live cattle have. If you would turn around and say you're getting offered some calves that, oh wow, look at that, they're a lot cheaper. I know I'm not selling my fat cattle quite as good as I'd like, but I can turn these cattle around and I can buy something that's more efficient. That usually helps to incentivize that, but good for the guy that's raising the calves, don't get me wrong, but they have not broke correspondingly. I think most people would agree with me that they haven't broken near as much as one would have expected.
So the talk of Saturday kills, does that bring some positive to try to keep things current?
One thing that even with algorithms and all that other stuff, somewhere down the line, fear and greed is still part of our market. And greed's a strong word. I'm trying to be entertaining. The packer doesn't kill on Saturdays unless he's got a reason to. And the reason would be either he's got a lot of meat sold or his margins are so good that he can afford to pay overtime. Look at it. Boxes above 290, well above 290. And now they're buying cattle under 170. They've got great margins. And toward the end of last week, we saw a huge uptick in the volume of box beef traded. So I would say it looks to me like we've got some of this stuff starting to get priced into consumption, is the phrase we use. In other words, they've backed it down where there's more interest, more demand. And the packer's going to go ahead and try to seize that margin by killing some extras. Well, that ought to help work some weight off, work through some of this supply. So some of these puzzle pieces are starting to fall together. We got to break the strangle that is this fun money that has made so much money selling rallies. And you got to make them wrong. Otherwise, they'll just keep doing what works. They don't know the difference between a steer and a heifer. Trust me. So hopefully coming through some of these trend lines, hopefully tomorrow we're a little better day, get our legs back underneath us again. I'd like to think that the lows we made, I think that season lows is what I'm feeling like.
Well, and finally, Brad, what about consumer confidence? You talk about we're going into holidays coming up here just around the corner, but with that comes a lot of spending that's been taking place and waiting for Fed announcements and everything else weighing in on this trade.
You ask a good question, a very almost impossible question, at least for me. I think, and anybody that really is realistic, right. It's hard to answer demand questions. We don't throw any beef away. So it's a matter of how high can you sell the available supply. I've heard some people talk about how high it is retail wise. I would beg to differ. I look every week at that big report that goes through it. But even if you really believe that, cold storage last month was less than a year ago. That means we sold a lot of stuff at a big price. Nothing personal against anybody that's watching this that runs a coffee shop, but we got a joke in here, like, $8 for a cup of, coffee with whatever, right. 2 shots of espresso and a half twist from the 10-meter board. I just don't see that. I think that there's a certain amount of our consumers that are used to eating the best product there is available, beef, and they're saying, you know what, I'm going to pay what it takes to get it. So now the export demand has had a little bit of a struggle here the last little while for sure. with the big spike in the U.S. dollar, I don't think that that's helped us, and that goes back to what you were saying with Fed policy and different things like that. I don't think it's a demand problem. I think it's a leverage problem. Let's see if we can get our leverage back.
All right. What's the best way for folks to get a hold of you guys?
Well, we still have a phone, 712-722-0023, or hook on to kkvtrading.com, and that'll help you with lots of stuff like this is all on there, and whatever else we have to give you some information about us.
All right. Well, that's a look at this week's cattle call. As we always remind you, commodity futures and options do involve a substantial risk of loss, not suitable to all investors. And that's the cattle call right here on the Rural Radio Network.